Black people have struggled against insurmountable odds for land, sometimes known as capital and jobs, free public education, and their political rights in this country. And now is no time to bow down to benign neglect. Our problem seems not to be the agreement on long-range goals, but rather our disagreement is over strategy. Unfortunately, we live in a country where institutions, attitudes, and often laws perpetrate injustices against us because of our race. And in finding strategies to combat racism, we fall into dispute not only with the majority white population, but among ourselves. Chinua Achebe points this fact out dramatically in his novel Things Fall Apart, which is the story of an African Igbo of Nigeria whose name is Okonkwo, and he must leave his clan because he has accidentally killed a fellow Klansman. To kill a Klansman, even accidentally, is taboo. And the punishment for this act is to leave the clan for 7 years. Okonkwo does this, and when he returns, he finds the missionaries have come and established a church. And he is unhappy with the changes which he finds. The European Christians were oppressing his people, forcing strange customs upon them and ruling them with laws which did not take into account or respect the Igbo rituals and rites, and they seemed unfair to him. And he wanted to resist, but his fellow clansmen who had been in the village all along while he had been gone were hesitant. Perhaps I have been away too long, Okonkwo said, but I cannot understand these things you tell me. What is it that has happened to our people? Why have they lost the power to fight? His friend Obiarika asked sadly, have you not heard how the white man wiped out Abami? I have heard, said Okonkwo, but I've also heard that Abami people were weak and foolish. Why did they not fight back? Had they no guns and machetes? We would be cowards to compare ourselves with the men of Abami. Their fathers have never dared to stand up before our ancestors. We must fight these men and drive them from the land. It is already too late, said Obiarika. Our own men and our sons have joined the ranks of the stranger. They have joined his religion, and they help to uphold his government. If we should try to drive out the white men in Umuofia, that would not be hard. There are only 2 of them here. But what of our own people who are following their way and have been given power? They would go to Amuru and bring the soldiers, and we would be like Abami. In great despair, Okonkwo asked, well, does the white man understand our custom about the land? How can he when he does not speak our tongue? But he says that our customs are bad, and our own brothers who have taken up his religion also say that our customs are bad. How do you think we can fight when our own brothers have turned against us? The white man is clever. He came quietly and peaceably with his religion. We were amused at his foolishness and allowed him to stay. Now he has won our brothers, and our clan can no longer act like one. He has put a knife on the things that held us together, and we have fallen apart. This story from Chinua Achebe illustrates the situation in which we find ourselves today. And the movement for the establishment of independent schools is an effort in a direction to put us back together again. And although the Christian church has been a home for the African in America, the tactic of divide and conquer has thwarted the attainment of our goals. When we were emancipated after the Civil War, we looked toward the future with great anticipation and joy. The period of 1865 to 1880 is often referred to as the period of the Reconstruction. Du Bois, in his work Black Reconstruction, explained that the sudden freeing of black folk in the 19th century made the attempt to reconstruct the basis of American democracy a necessity. He shows that the newly freed black slaves struggled to get free public education, land, and the vote. But most Americans used the black man to defend their own economic interests, and refusing him adequate land and real education and even common justice, deserted him shamelessly as soon as their selfish interests were safe. And Brother Lerone Bennett has illustrated this in his new book, The Shaping of Black America. Moreover, the solemn verdict of all America, says Du Bois, was that black men should not be allowed to fight for themselves. They were dissuaded from every attempt at self-protection or aggression by their friends as well as their enemies. And regardless, black men did not give up this struggle easily. They continued to hold remnants of power, sending black congressmen out of the South until 1895 and black legislators until 1896. But it was a losing battle with public opinion, industry, wealth, and religion against them. And our own leaders deemed politics and preached submission, similar to the situation in which Okonkwo found himself. And all efforts toward manly assertion were distracted by defeatism and counsels of despair, supported by the powerful propaganda of a religion which taught meekness, sacrifice, and humility. Du Bois also stresses the importance of economic pressure. And what he said then about the first Reconstruction is so pertinent to us today, especially in the light of the fact that most of the urban public school systems are increasingly becoming majority black and poor. He says, the decisive influence was the systematic and overwhelming economic pressure. Negroes who wanted work must not dabble in politics. Negroes who wanted to increase their income must not agitate the Negro problem. Positions of influence were only open to those Negroes who were certified as safe and sane. No crazy niggas. And their careers were closely scrutinized and passed upon. From 1880, the American Negro was compelled to give up his political power. Frederick Douglass and W.E.B. Du Bois stand out as the great black spokesman of this era, the former during the first Reconstruction and the second afterwards, and both of them argued that power concedes nothing without a demand, that the American black man's fight is here, and it is a fight to the finish, and that the black man must enter modern civilization here in America and on equal terms with the white man. Douglass and Du Bois stood for no compromising on this issue. And there were white statesmen who spoke to this issue, notably Charles Sumner and Thaddeus Stevens. On the side of compromise and accommodation stood Booker T. Washington, who was selected to be the leader of and the spokesman for black Americans until his death in 1915. And Washington urged the colored people of the South to cast down their bucket in agriculture, mechanics, commerce, domestic service, and the profession. And he also urged the white people to sink down their bucket where they were, rather than rely upon immigrants of strange tongue and habits. Washington, according to Rayford Logan, unmistakably accepted a subordinate position for Southern Negroes. And this position, says Logan, was far different from the unequivocal stand for equal citizenship advanced by Douglass in 1889. And of course, Du Bois became Washington's most vocal critic. But accommodation prevailed. The first Reconstruction failed to give black men equality. And legislature after legislature in the southern states passed law after law abrogating the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. And so because white America missed the opportunity to reconstruct itself on the basis of democracy, and because black America gave up the struggle for accommodation, this dream was deferred to explode once again 100 years later in the oratory of two ministers, one Christian and one Muslim, neither preaching docility, neither preaching passivity, neither preaching submission. After more than a decade of protests, civil disorders, and turmoil, the Second Reconstruction commenced. And clearly, 100 years later, 1975, the black man's problems are the same. And Lerone Bennett said they are no land, no jobs, poor education, and limited political rights. And history tells us that accommodation to racism wins nothing except failure. Adjustment to oppression reaps disrespect. Acculturation to European arrogance brings black tyrants. And yet, the disagreement over strategy still prevails. And again, we find black faces in the Congress, this time forming a black caucus. And most of these new congressmen and women come from big cities, 2 from Detroit, 2 from Chicago, 2 from New York City, 3 from the big cities in California, 1 from Cleveland, 1 from Philadelphia, 2 from the Deep South, 1 from Atlanta, 1 from Houston, 1 from Baltimore, and 1 from Memphis. But the important thing to remember is that this black presence in the House of Representatives was produced by the voting power of the black people concentrated in the big cities. And lest there be some complacent folks in this audience who believe this will remain or even increase, as I have been reading, we should look at the picture of the North in the recent elections. Black mayors were defeated for re-election in Boulder, Colorado, Inkster and Highland Park, Michigan, College Park, Maryland, and Paulsboro, New Jersey. Black challengers were set back in Cleveland, Ohio, and Flint, Michigan. The black mayor of President Ford's hometown, Grand Rapids, Michigan, was defeated earlier this year in a Republican primary. The one big victory in the North was Richard Gordon Hatcher, re-elected to his third 4-year term as mayor of Gary, Indiana. And have you driven through Gary recently? The 8-story hotel, downtown hotel in Steel City, USA, is boarded up next door to Richard Gordon Hatcher's office. And U.S. Steel and Bethlehem Steel are still in Gary. And everyone knows that the big steel executives not only have lots of conferences and executive meetings in downtown hotels, but also lots of parties and orgies. Black losses on the whole in northern cities seem to counter a recent trend that has seen blacks being elected in cities with white majorities. According to John Britton, spokesman for the Joint Center for Political Studies in Washington, D.C., and the U.S. News and World Report, which states on November 17, 1975, that the mood of the American electorate is one of back to normalcy. Normalcy is white public elected officials, especially for towns majority white. The number of public elected officials is on the rise, however, in areas where blacks are in or near a majority. Should we protect these power bases or lose them? According to Banfield, the critical questions being asked now in big cities, and this is like 10 years old. Number 1, is the central city to become the possession of the lower class and of the minority groups, or is it to be restored to the middle class? 2, if it is to be restored to the middle class, where is the lower class going to live? If it is not restored to the middle class, what will happen to the centers of economic and cultural life in the cores of the central cities? If these centers lose their vitality, how will the preeminent role that the central city has played in the creation and dissemination of culture be filled in the future? I think you all know what's going on in Chicago. If you don't, Chicago has opted for restoring the city to the white middle class. Presently, most large cities are opting for that. In Washington, D.C., the plan is to achieve a white majority of 62% by 1980, to change Chocolate City to Vanilla Town. What strategy should black public elected officials choose to thwart these plans if there is agreement among black people that such a change is desirable or undesirable? Where will the black poor live, and who will provide for them? There is presently no unity among our leaders regarding any of these answers. Some leaders believe the interest of the black middle class is with the white middle class. And these are not all intellectuals either. Their values, norms, interests, aspirations are the same as the white middle class. These leaders pursue the objective of pushing the black poor out of the city at whatever social cost. These leaders are in the front line when it comes to organizing niggers for Nixon, niggers for Israel, niggers for Moynihan, but very short when it comes to organizing niggers for niggers.